I stood there watching my husband and his mother laugh at me, thinking I'd be sleeping with the cruise staff in some cramped quarters below deck. They had no idea I owned the cruise line. My name is Pippa Hawthorne, and for 3 years I've been married to a man who thinks I'm beneath him. Today, on what was supposed to be our anniversary cruise, I discovered just how little my husband actually thinks of me. But what happened next changed everything. That's my husband Jasper over there, the one in the expensive polo shirt making jokes with the staff about upgrading his wife's accommodation. He's a marketing manager who prides himself on always knowing the right thing to say, except when it comes to defending his wife. And that woman beside him, the one with the perfectly styled hair and the designer handbag she keeps positioning so everyone can see the logo, that's my mother-in-law, Imogen Hartwell. She spent 3 years making sure I know exactly what she thinks of me. I met Jasper in a little coffee shop in Camden 3 years ago. I was working on my laptop and he thought I looked like someone who needed rescuing, someone small and manageable, someone safe. He had no idea that the woman typing away in the corner booth was actually building something bigger than he could imagine. See, I made a choice when I met Jasper. I told him I worked in travel, which wasn't exactly a lie. I just didn't mention that I didn't work for a travel company. I owned one. 12 luxury cruise ships to be exact, including this one. I thought keeping my success private would protect our love from becoming about money. I thought it would keep things real. Instead, it gave them permission to treat me like I was nothing. But tonight at dinner, when Captain Rodriguez walks up to our table and calls me by my real title, everything is going to change. What you're about to hear is the story of how I learned that hiding who you are to make others comfortable only teaches them to be comfortable hurting you. It's about the moment I stopped making myself small and started taking up the space I'd earned. By the end of tonight, my husband and his mother are going to discover that the woman they've been looking down on actually owns the ground they're standing on. And their reaction is going to show me everything I need to know about the last 3 years of my life. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding how I got here makes what happened next even more unbelievable. 3 years ago, I was sitting in this tiny coffee shop in Camden, hunched over my laptop at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I had spreadsheets covering every inch of my table, financial projections for what would become my 4th cruise ship acquisition. The coffee was terrible, but the shop stayed open late and nobody bothered me there. That's when Jasper walked in. Tall, charming, with this confident smile that made him look like he owned the world. He ordered his coffee, and I watched him glance over at my table, taking in the chaos of papers and my tired appearance. Most men would have left me alone, but Jasper saw an opportunity to be someone's hero. "Rough night at work?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from me without invitation. "You look like you could use some company." I should have seen the red flag right there, the assumption that I needed rescuing. The way he automatically positioned himself as the solution to problems I didn't have. But I was exhausted from 18-hour days building my empire, and his attention felt like a warm blanket after years of focusing on nothing but business. When he asked what I did for work, I made the decision that would haunt me for the next 3 years. Instead of telling him I was CEO of Oceanic Luxury Cruises, I simply said, I work in travel. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I told myself I was protecting our potential relationship from becoming about money. I'd watched too many friendships crumble when people discovered my wealth. I'd had too many dates with men who suddenly became interested in expensive restaurants and weekend getaways once they learned about my business success. With Jasper, I wanted something real, something pure. So I kept living in my small Camden flat, wore clothes from high street shops, and let him believe I was just another working woman struggling to make ends meet. For the first 6 months, it was magical. Jasper was attentive, romantic, protective in all the right ways. He paid for dinners because he wanted to take care of me. He brought me flowers because he thought I deserved something beautiful in my modest life. He made me feel cherished in a way I'd never experienced. But then I met his mother. Imogen Hartwell walked into our relationship like a hurricane in designer heels. She took one look at my simple dress and off-brand handbag and immediately categorized me as beneath her son's station. The first words she ever spoke to me were, "So you're the little travel agent Jasper's been seeing. How lovely." The way she said little made it clear she wasn't referring to my height. From that moment, every family gathering became a subtle interrogation about my background, my education, my family's financial situation. Imogen had a gift for asking invasive questions that sounded like polite conversation. Where did your parents buy their house, dear? What kind of car do you drive? Have you ever been on a proper holiday abroad? Each question was designed to reinforce the same message. You don't belong here. The worst part wasn't Imogen's behavior. It was watching Jasper slowly start to agree with her assessment. At first, he defended me. Mum, leave Pippa alone. Not everyone needs to flash their wealth around. But gradually, her constant commentary began to influence how he saw me. He started making jokes about my bargain hunting skills when I bought clothes from Zara instead of Harrods. He began suggesting we eat at cheaper restaurants because it was more my speed. When I mentioned wanting to travel somewhere exotic for our anniversary, he laughed and said, "Maybe we should start with something more realistic for your budget." The man who once made me feel cherished began making me feel ashamed of who I thought I was. But here's the thing they didn't know. While they were busy looking down on me, I was building something extraordinary. Every day they thought I was at some small travel agency. I was actually in boardrooms negotiating multi-million-pound deals. While Imogen was criticizing my cheap lifestyle, I was expanding my fleet and becoming one of the youngest female CEOs in the luxury cruise industry. The Camden flat wasn't poverty. It was a choice. I liked the neighborhood's authenticity. The simple clothes weren't all I could afford. They were comfortable and practical for someone who spent 12 hours a day running a business empire. I kept telling myself their opinions didn't matter because they didn't know the real me. But slowly, their constant criticism began to chip away at my confidence. I started wondering if revealing my success would fix everything or if it would just create different problems. That's what led us to this cruise. Our third anniversary was approaching, and I decided it was time to tell them the truth. I secretly booked us passage on my flagship vessel, the Sovereign Pearl. I put Imogen in a first-class suite as a peace offering, planning to reveal everything during a romantic dinner with Jasper. I thought honesty would heal our relationship. I had no idea it would expose just how broken it already was. The moment we stepped into the ship's marble-floored lobby, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake, not in booking the cruise, but in thinking this trip would somehow bring us closer together. Instead, it became the stage for the most humiliating experience of my marriage. The Sovereign Pearl's check-in area is breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hang from soaring ceilings, and floor-to-ceiling windows offer stunning views of the Mediterranean harbor. Passengers mill around in their finest travel attire, excitement buzzing through conversations in a dozen languages. This was my ship, my creation, my pride and joy, and I was about to be humiliated aboard it by the two people who were supposed to love me most. Imogen strode toward the platinum-level check-in counter like she owned the place, her designer luggage trailing behind her on gold-plated wheels. She dressed for the occasion in head-to-toe cream linen that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, accessorized with jewelry that caught the lobby's lighting perfectly. "We'll need assistance with our first-class luggage," she announced to the uniformed staff member, her voice carrying across the lobby. Other passengers turned to look, which was exactly what she wanted. Imogen never missed an opportunity to establish her social hierarchy. Jasper stood beside her, looking every inch the successful businessman in his pressed khakis and polo shirt that I knew had cost him 200 pounds. He was already charming the staff with his practiced smile, the one that had first attracted me in that Camden coffee shop. That's when Imogen turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Pippa, dear, don't look so confused standing there," she said, loud enough for the families around us to hear clearly. "We explained this already, didn't we? Jasper and I are in the luxury suites up on deck 12. You'll be staying down in steerage with the staff quarters." My stomach dropped. The words hit me like ice water, but it was the casual way she delivered them that made it worse, like she was discussing the weather or pointing out obvious directions to someone too simple to understand. "It's what makes sense given your circumstances," she continued, adjusting her handbag strap with practiced precision. "We certainly can't expect Jasper to pay for accommodations you could never afford yourself. That wouldn't be fair to anyone." I felt the familiar burn of embarrassment creeping up my neck, but this time it was mixed with something much stronger. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage that I'd been swallowing for 3 years finally began to surface. But before I could find my voice, Jasper jumped in with a laugh that sounded forced even to my ears. "Come on, Mom, don't be so harsh," he said, but his tone suggested he found the situation amusing rather than appalling. Then he turned to me with that patronizing smile I'd learned to hate. "You're used to low class anyway, right? This is probably still an upgrade from that tiny apartment of yours." The lobby seemed to go quiet around us. I could feel other passengers glancing our way, some with curiosity, others with the uncomfortable recognition of witnessing something they shouldn't. A young couple with their toddler moved slightly away from us. An elderly gentleman shook his head and muttered something to his wife. "Besides," Jasper continued, warming to his theme, "you'll probably be more comfortable with people in your own social bracket. The staff quarters are perfectly adequate. It's not like you're used to luxury anyway." Imogen nodded approvingly at her son's words. "Exactly. We're being quite generous, really. Most people in Pippa's position wouldn't even be able to afford passage on a ship like this." I stood there holding my simple boarding pass, watching my husband and his mother discuss my accommodations like I was a piece of luggage they needed to store somewhere convenient. The marble floor felt unsteady beneath my feet, and I gripped my small suitcase handle so tightly my knuckles went white. This wasn't about the cabin assignment. This was about 3 years of accumulated disrespect finally reaching its breaking point. This was about the man I'd married casually agreeing that I belonged below deck with the service staff while he enjoyed luxury suites above. But here's what they didn't know. I could have ended this humiliation with a single phone call. One word to any crew member, one glance toward the captain's quarters, one mention of my real name to the concierge desk. I owned this ship, employed every person they were trying to impress, and had designed every luxury suite they thought made them superior to me. Instead, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to let this play out. I needed to see exactly how far my husband would let his mother's cruelty go. I needed to understand who I'd really married. "Of course," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm building inside me. "The staff quarters will be fine." Imogen smiled triumphantly. Jasper looked relieved. Neither of them noticed the staff member behind the counter glance at me with confused recognition, or the way several crew members in the background had stopped their conversations to stare. The game was about to begin, and they had no idea they were already losing. Standing there in that opulent lobby, holding my boarding pass like some kind of charity case, I made the most important decision of my marriage. I was going to let them hang themselves with their own rope. "Of course," I said quietly, forcing my voice to remain steady. "The staff quarters will be fine." Imogen's face lit up with satisfaction, like she'd just won a particularly challenging game. Jasper looked relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. Neither of them noticed the confused glances from the crew members who recognized me, or the way the platinum-level concierge kept looking between me and his computer screen with growing bewilderment. A young crew member named Marcus approached us, clearly trying to resolve what he thought was a booking error. I knew Marcus well. He'd been with the company for 2 years and had personally thanked me last Christmas for the crew bonus program I'd implemented. "Excuse me, Mrs. Hawthorne," he began, but I caught his eye and gave the slightest shake of my head. Years of running board meetings had taught me the power of subtle communication. "Yes, I'll be staying in the staff quarters," I said clearly, watching his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and finally understanding. "Could you please show me the way?" Marcus, bless him, was professional enough to play along despite his obvious confusion. "Of course, ma'am, right this way." As we walked toward the staff elevators, I could hear Imogen behind me, speaking loudly enough for other passengers to overhear. "It's really for the best. Some people need to understand their place in the world. We can't all live beyond our means." The staff elevator was a simple affair compared to the guest elevators with their gilded mirrors and soft lighting. As the doors closed, Marcus finally spoke. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I don't understand. Your owner's suite is ready on the top deck. Captain Rodriguez has been expecting you since yesterday. What would you like me to tell him?" I looked at this young man who depended on me for his livelihood, who'd probably saved for months to bring his girlfriend on our employee cruise program, and I made a decision that went against every business instinct I'd developed. Marcus, I need you to trust me on something. I want you to actually assign me to a staff quarters room, a real one. Not the owner's suite, not a passenger cabin. I need to see how this plays out. His eyes widened. Ma'am, the staff quarters are quite small. They're not designed for passengers, especially not for you. I understand, but I need Captain Rodriguez to know that tomorrow evening during the formal dinner service in the first-class dining room, I want him to approach my table. I'll be dining with my husband and his mother. I need him to address me by my full name and title in front of them and the other passengers. Marcus nodded slowly, though I could see him struggling to understand why his boss would willingly subject herself to substandard accommodations. Should I inform the rest of the senior staff? Only Captain Rodriguez and the dining room manager. Everyone else should treat me exactly as they would any other staff member staying in quarters. Can you do that? Of course, Mrs. Hawthorne, but may I ask why? I thought about how to explain 3 years of accumulated humiliation, about the slow erosion of respect in my marriage, about the need to finally understand who my husband really was when he thought no one important was watching. Because sometimes you need to step back to see the whole picture, Marcus, and sometimes people only show you their true selves when they think there are no consequences. The staff quarters were indeed small, a narrow bunk bed, a tiny porthole, and a shared bathroom down the hall. I'd stayed in luxury hotels around the world, slept in the owner's suite of every ship in my fleet, but that night I lay on a thin mattress, listening to the ocean through steel walls and planning what would happen next. I spent the first day of our cruise playing the role they'd assigned me. While Jasper and Imogen enjoyed champagne breakfast on their private balcony, I ate in the staff cafeteria and pretended to work in the ship's travel coordination office. I had a perfect view of the security monitors from there, which meant I could watch my husband and his mother living it up on my dime while making jokes about my absence. During their lunch at the specialty steakhouse, I watched Jasper order the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu. Might as well enjoy the luxury while we can, he told his mother. Pippa certainly can't afford to treat us like this again anytime soon. Imogen raised her glass in agreement. It's good for her to see how the other half lives. Maybe it will motivate her to improve her situation. That evening, Jasper briefly wondered aloud if they'd been too harsh with me. For a moment, watching him through the monitor, I thought I saw a flicker of the man I'd fallen in love with, but Imogen was quick to dismiss his concerns. Jasper, darling, you can't coddle her forever. She needs to understand reality. The sooner she accepts her limitations, the happier everyone will be. I watch my husband nod in agreement and order another expensive cocktail. Tomorrow evening, during formal dinner, Captain Rodriguez would approach our table and everything would change. I just had to survive one more day of being treated like I was nothing by the man who promised to love me forever. The funny thing was, lying there in that narrow bunk, I felt more like myself than I had in years. Formal dinner night aboard the Sovereign Pearl is always spectacular. But tonight, it felt like the entire universe had aligned for this single moment. The first-class dining room gleamed under crystal chandeliers, each table draped in crisp white linens and adorned with fresh orchids. Passengers had dressed in their finest evening wear, creating a sea of elegant gowns and sharp tuxedos throughout the room. I stood at the entrance wearing a simple black dress I'd borrowed from the staff lost and found, nothing fancy but clean and appropriate. My heart hammered against my ribs as I spotted Jasper and Imogen at their table near the center of the room, exactly where they'd requested to be seen by as many people as possible. Imogen had outdone herself tonight in a flowing navy gown that probably cost more than most people's cars, her jewelry catching the light with every gesture. Jasper looked handsome in his dinner jacket, playing the role of successful gentleman with practiced ease. They were laughing about something when I approached, champagne glasses already half empty. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Imogen said loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear. Pippa, darling, you look positively working class in that little frock. Did you borrow it from housekeeping? Several nearby diners glanced over with uncomfortable expressions. An older couple at the next table exchanged worried looks, clearly sensing the tension but unsure whether to intervene. "Come on, Mum," Jasper said, but he was still smiling. "Let her sit down. We can spare one dinner for charity work." I took my seat without saying a word, my hands folded carefully in my lap. Around us, the dining room buzzed with elegant conversation and the gentle clink of silverware against fine china. Servers moved gracefully between tables, delivering courses that represented the finest culinary artistry our chefs could create. "I do hope you're not expecting to order from the main menu," Imogen continued, studying her leather-bound wine list. "Perhaps there's a staff meal option more suited to your budget." That's when I saw him. Captain Rodriguez, resplendent in his formal uniform with gold braiding that caught the chandelier light, was making his way across the dining room. He moved with the authority of someone who commanded respect wherever he went, stopping briefly at select tables to greet VIP passengers. But his eyes were locked on our table, and I could see the moment of recognition in his face as he spotted me in my borrowed dress. We'd worked together for 5 years. He'd been at the helm when we'd launched 3 of our newest ships. He knew exactly who I was. The conversations at nearby tables began to quiet as passengers noticed the captain's purposeful approach. This wasn't his usual social mingling. This was official business. Captain Rodriguez stopped directly beside our table, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone within a 10-foot radius. The entire section of the dining room seemed to hold its breath. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said in his clear, authoritative voice that had commanded ships through Mediterranean storms. "I must apologize for the confusion with your accommodations. Your private owner's suite on the top deck has been prepared exactly to your specifications. The staff has been waiting for your approval on tomorrow's itinerary changes." The wine glass slipped from Imogen's hand, sending Chablis cascading across the white tablecloth and into her lap. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for air, no sound emerging. Jasper's face drained of all color, his confident expression crumbling into something that looked like terror. "Owner's suite," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "Pippa, what is he talking about?" I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 3 years of accumulated hurt and humiliation settling into something resembling power. The dining room had gone completely silent now, with passengers at nearby tables openly staring at our unfolding drama. "I'm talking about the fact that I own this cruise line, Jasper," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet. "All 12 ships in our fleet, actually. The Sovereign Pearl, the Mediterranean Star, the Ocean's Crown. Every single vessel you've been enjoying for the past 2 days belongs to me." The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then the whispers began, rippling outward from our table like stones thrown into still water. "Oceanic luxury cruises," I continued, looking directly at my husband's shocked face. "Perhaps you've heard of it. We're the largest privately owned cruise line in Europe. I built it from nothing over the past 8 years, while you thought I was struggling to book package holidays for middle-class families." Imogen finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "But the apartment, the clothes, the modest lifestyle were my choices," I said firmly. "The Camden flat is comfortable, and I like the neighborhood. The simple clothes are practical for someone who spends 14 hours a day running a business empire, and the modest lifestyle was my way of finding someone who would love me for who I was, not what I owned." I turned to face Jasper fully, seeing my husband clearly for perhaps the first time in our 3-year marriage. Instead, I discovered I married someone who was ashamed of who he thought I was. The revelation hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore or take back. The silence that followed my revelation felt eternal. Every eye in the first-class dining room was fixed on our table, watching the most expensive relationship implosion in maritime history unfold before their appetizers had even arrived. Jasper was the first to break. He reached across the table with trembling hands, knocking over his water glass in the process. "Pippa, we need to talk privately. This is all just a misunderstanding." But Imogen, true to form, couldn't resist making everything worse. Even soaked in wine and facing complete social annihilation, she attempted damage control with all the grace of a sinking ship. "Well, why didn't you just tell us?" she demanded, her voice shrill enough to make nearby diners wince. "How were we supposed to know?" "You deliberately deceived us." The audacity of it took my breath away. 3 years of being treated like hired help, and she was making this my fault for not correcting their behavior sooner. "You're absolutely right, Imogen," I said, my voice carrying across the now silent dining room. "I should have told you. I should have announced my wealth the moment you decided I wasn't good enough for your son. Then you could have treated me with basic human decency for entirely the wrong reasons." Captain Rodriguez cleared his throat diplomatically. "Mrs. Hawthorne, shall I have your belongings moved to the owner's suite immediately?" "Yes, thank you, Captain. And please ensure that Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell's champagne service continues as planned. After all, they're my guests." The emphasis I placed on my guests wasn't lost on anyone within earshot. Several passengers were now openly filming the confrontation with their phones, and I knew this story would be circulating social media within hours. Jasper stood up so quickly he knocked his chair backward. "Pippa, please, let me explain. I was just going along with Mum's jokes. I never meant any of it seriously." "Which part wasn't serious, Jasper?" "When you agreed I belonged in staff quarters, when you said I was used to low-class treatment, when you told your mother that this cruise was probably beyond my budget while I was literally paying for every bite of food you put in your mouth." His face crumpled as the full weight of his behavior hit him. "I thought you were just being modest about money. I thought you had some savings tucked away, maybe family money you didn't talk about. I never imagined you were actually wealthy." "What's the problem right there?" I said, feeling 3 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. "You didn't imagine I could be successful on my own. You assumed that any money I might have must have come from somewhere else, someone else. It never occurred to you that the woman you married might have built something extraordinary." The dining room remained captivated by our personal drama, but I no longer cared about the audience. This conversation was 3 years overdue. Every day, while you thought I was answering phones at some small travel agency, I was in boardrooms negotiating million-pound contracts. While your mother was criticizing my cheap lifestyle, I was expanding my fleet and employing thousands of people. While you were both making jokes about my limitations, I was building an empire. Imogen made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative. This is all very dramatic, but surely we can work past this misunderstanding as a family. I looked at her with something that might have been pity if I'd had any sympathy left to spare. "Imogen, for 3 years you've made sure I knew exactly how little you thought of me. You've criticized everything from my clothes to my address to my presumed background. The only thing that's changed in the last 5 minutes is your knowledge of my bank balance." I turned back to Jasper, seeing clearly for the first time the man I'd actually married versus the man I'd hoped he could become. I kept my success private because I wanted to be loved for who I was. Instead, I created a situation where you felt comfortable showing me exactly who you were. And now I know. Jasper's eyes filled with tears that might have moved me a week ago. "I can change. We can start over. I'll never let anyone treat you that way again." "The damage is done, Jasper. I've seen how you treat people you think are beneath you. I've watched you laugh at someone you believed had less than you. That's not a misunderstanding. That's character." I gathered my small purse and stood to leave, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I'll be in the owner's suite if you need anything for the remainder of the cruise. Your accommodations will remain as booked, of course. I'm many things, but I'm not petty." As I walked toward the dining room exit, I could hear the explosion of conversation that erupted behind me. Passengers were already pulling out their phones, and I knew that by morning, this story would be viral across every social media platform. 3 days later, as we docked back in Southampton, I stood on my private balcony watching Jasper and Imogen disembark with their luggage. They moved quickly, heads down, avoiding the curious stares of other passengers who recognized them from that dining room incident. My assistant had already forwarded me interview requests from 4 major business magazines and 3 television programs. For the first time in my life, I was ready to step into the spotlight and own my success publicly. The divorce papers were filed the following Monday. Jasper kept the Camden flat and his marketing job. I kept my dignity, my business empire, and my newfound understanding that the right person will love you more for your strength, not less. Sometimes the most painful moments teach us the most valuable lessons about ourselves and the people around us. I learned that hiding who you are doesn't protect you from being hurt. It just teaches people that it's safe to hurt you. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with your own experiences of standing up for yourself. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about finding your strength when it matters most.